Hello, my name is Randy Scamihorn, and this is the Chairman's Brief. As Chairman of the Cobb Board of Education, I have the privilege of serving as spokesperson for the Cobb School Board. The school board, together with our staff, students, parents, and community, make up our team striving for our common goal, student success. This fall, Cobb voters are going to choose whether to continue using the Ed-SPLOST penny tax to pay for school needs. Today we're going to hear from the man heading up our Ed-SPLOST Department, Mr. Nick Parker. Nick, I appreciate you being here.
It's nice to be here, Randy.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your department.
Sure. Well, I've been with the Cobb County School District now for 8 years. I'm retired from Delta Airlines of 28 years, so I came here with a background in facilities and properties, and so been working with our SPLOST department these past 8 years. SPLOST is the Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax, as we all know. That's we receive a penny for every dollar spent in Cobb County, and with that, we are fortunate to be able to improve upon all of our capital improvements, primarily school buildings and infrastructure here in our 112 schools.
I know Ed-SPLOST is very specific on what the money can be used for, but it also has limitations. Can you expand on the what we can use it for, and then also what can we not use it for?
Sure, absolutely. There are several categories of capital improvements that we can utilize SPLOST funds from. The first that most folks recognize are for new and replacement schools. Absent from that, we go into either additions to schools, if we need some additional classrooms, or modifications to schools as well. We then look at all of our infrastructure, Randy, which is primarily all of our roofs, our air conditioning systems, our plumbing, our electrical, those types of things that need refreshed from time to time after they've expended their lifetime. We also query all the principals in all of our schools and get their individual school needs that they feel like should be considered for improvements at their schools. We also query our other divisions, public safety, to look at access control and surveillance cameras. Transportation, we buy new buses with SPLOST funds. Food and nutritional services, all of our kitchen equipment and cafeteria needs are also purchased by SPLOST. And then, of course, two big areas, which is academics, which is really why we're here. We look at all the learning resources that are going to be necessary for that 5-year SPLOST period and purchase their learning resources. And then technology refresh. As we all know, we have computers and printers and audiovisual equipment that all needs to be refreshed from time to time. So those are the primary categories that you can utilize SPLOST funds for. What you cannot use SPLOST funds for are items aside from that, salaries, benefits. Those things are paid from the operating general fund, as you well know. So we are really just restricted to buildings and equipment and furniture that enhance truly our infrastructure and our buildings and our capital improvements.
Can I buy copy paper? Can I go out and buy food or whatever?
Yeah, those are not considered capital improvements. It needs to be a material capital improvement. And again, that's why we restrict it to primarily buildings, equipment, buses, things that you can literally utilize over a period of time and not just use and throw away. So they have to be a longer lasting capital improvement.
Another limitation that comes to my mind, correct me if I'm wrong, is by law, we have to specify what we want to use our SPLOST money for. So if something comes up and it's not in our SPLOST list, we call a notebook, and a very extensive notebook. By law, if it's not in our notebook, can we just change it, on that year that we find out we have a need?
Yeah. We have to publish our resolution for the voters to vote in November, as you've just mentioned earlier. And we have to specify the areas and the categories that we will be spending. So we cannot be changing those. Now we have traditionally had a category that is a catch-all for classroom needs and things like that we just don't anticipate at this point in time. So we do have an area in there that we have some flexibility, and that's basically undesignated classrooms. And that gives us that flexibility to literally build classrooms or add classrooms that we had not anticipated before.
which we have had to do in years past on earlier SPLOST, because we have to project this out literally about at least 5, maybe even 8 years.
Correct.
And that's a long time to be trying to guess. Education with knowledge, trying to guess, not willy-nilly guessing.
Yes.
Where we're going to be and what we have to do.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct, Randy. So, our planning occurs anywhere from 6 to 8 years in advance of a SPLOST referendum. So we do our best. We get our projections for enrollment, which helps us anticipate perhaps what new schools we would need, or whether or not we need to replace a school and build and make it bigger based upon the enrollments. We also, again, query all the departments and try to anticipate what their needs will be for that future 5-year period.
Can we use SPLOST money for salaries?
We cannot.
Okay.
Salaries are and benefits. Now, I'll say that the SPLOST Department is funded by salaries. Our salaries and benefits are provided by SPLOST funding, because that's specifically what we do. All the other personnel in the school are not funded by SPLOST. They are funded by the operating general fund.
But we would not be allowed to do that because of the limitations of
Correct.
SPLOST guidance and the laws.
Correct.
So, well, tell us a little bit about the process you use to figure out what projects we're going to do.
Okay, that's a good question. The first thing we normally do is have our finance division try to forecast what our revenue generation will be for that 5-year period, because we need a target by which to aim for with regard to how much we spend. So our finance division does a great job of coming up with their formula and their inflationary figures to give us a projection of what they think we will collect during that 5-year period. From there, Randy, we literally, again, as I said before, we look at projected enrollments for that period, and that will give us the number of students we expect for that period to help us determine if we need to build a new school, or if we need to add additional classrooms, etc. From there, we also query our academics division and our technologies division, and we get their list of needs for that period: refreshment of computers, printers, audiovisual equipment, obviously learning resources that they project will be necessary during that period of time. We again indicate get with our transportation department for buses. We get with food and nutritional services to look at all the lunchroom equipment and kitchen equipment that's necessary. And as we said earlier, we do query all the schools and get their needs. And we always have more on our list than what we can certainly spend, or what we'll have revenue to spend. The superintendent correctly states that we always have somewhere around $2 billion worth of needs for capital improvements in the school district, because as we age, all of our systems age. And so we always have more needs than what we have monies to expend.
Well, one of the things too that, excuse me, one of the things too that we have to decide on, that I hear, besides we always have more needs than we have money, is we have to decide where that money's going to go, as far as like, and we could spend probably hours on listing like carpet,
Right.
Fixing doors or whatever. So
you're absolutely correct. It's always a very challenging time to try to determine how much money goes to each category. Obviously, the priorities are schools, and do we need to build any additional schools or build additional classrooms for students? Because we're here with that one goal of student success. So we try to identify the needs of how many schools we need or how many classrooms we need. But technology, we know we've always got to refresh technology every so many years, because as you and I have cell phones, we know that every once in a while those get antiquated and you have to upgrade those cell phones. I try to tell people to look at their home. They know that after so many years they have to replace the roof.
Yeah.
They know that after so much time they have to replace the air conditioning or the heating. They know they have to at times go in and replace. They may have an electrical issue in their home, or a toilet issue in the bathroom. So those things we look at, but on a much larger scale with 112 schools. But we look at all that infrastructure. In the current proposed SPLOST, infrastructure is one of our main targets for improvement, because we have roofs that are over 20 years old. We have HVAC systems that are aging, and so just as we have all those new schools, we have a lot of older schools as well. So we have to go in and refresh the infrastructure.
Okay. Now you mentioned our finance department briefly. You get with them and we try, I think, to match the amount that they estimate to what we can realistically do.
Right.
Now, it's my understanding that our funding is only two main sources, and that's state revenue and property taxes. Is that correct?
Yes, and you are correct. Other than the SPLOST, but the property taxes is primarily what is utilized for the operating fund, which is, I think, about 90% of that covers salaries and benefits for all the teachers and all the folks who work for the school district. So SPLOST funding is a primary source for our facilities. Without it, it's likely that we would have some very difficult times ahead of us.
Okay. And I've mentioned it already, but we hear about the SPLOST Notebook. Is that a requirement to publish a notebook?
It is not. In fact, I'm not aware of another school district that publishes a notebook that has the amount of information that we provide to the community. We're very pleased to do that because we feel like if you go out and vote on November 2nd, you need to know what you're voting for. And a lot of school districts do not go to the extent of publicizing the amount of projects that we're going to try to undertake.
Okay. Now, demographically, where does that play in as far as Cobb County has been ever growing in population, in roads, and other needs? How does that play into what you do? And do you coordinate with others with that?
We certainly keep up with all the forecasts for the county as far as population and so forth. We have a very accurate student enrollment that is updated every year to help us try to understand how many students we need to serve. So all that comes into play as to which schools and what kinds of projects, infrastructure we need to improve upon as well. I might just say that without SPLOST, there was a time when Cobb County didn't have a SPLOST, but it's been about 25 or 30 years ago. During that time, the primary source of capital improvements came from bonds. It's like a loan. You have to pay them back over several years with a lot of interest. And the only other source would be to increase the millage rate, which would increase property taxes as well. So SPLOST County is unique in that we do have a SPLOST program to help us with all these capital improvements.
So now, along with our population growth, what about our real estate and land considerations? How does that play in with our population growth and our SPLOST?
Well, certainly we look at what land opportunities are available to us. If we have a property that comes up adjacent to one of our current schools, we always evaluate whether or not perhaps we should purchase additional property for future growth, whether it be for classrooms or play fields or whatever the case may be. So we try to keep apprised of all the land opportunities that are available. Certainly if we have a new school, we look at what area that school is going to be built in, and we go out and research what property might be available. So land value has certainly increased in the last few years, and just as all of our property values have increased as well.
We touched on maintenance needs and priorities. You know, with COVID going on, oftentimes I'll get an email or two asking about our HVAC and our ventilations. Is that a priority in SPLOST, or do we separate that out?
Primarily, that's a maintenance priority. Gene Trull in our maintenance department does a great job of maintaining all of our schools. They do, though, give us a priority listing of all the major infrastructure out there. We have a listing of which roofs are in most need of repair or replacement. We have a listing of what air conditioning systems are nearing the end of their lifetime and need to be replaced. So the maintenance priority lists come into play for us when we start determining what projects that we want to pursue.
Okay. Well, if we're not growing as fast as we used to, but we're still growing, so that means we're not building as many new schools. What would we use Ed-SPLOST funding for?
That's a good question, Randy. We truly look at the age of our schools. That's something we look at first, because we've got several schools that are 40 years plus old, and obviously we look at whether or not they need to be replaced or remodeled. and added to or subtracted from. So the age of schools is important to us. We look at the age of all of our systems out there. We've already talked about roofs and HVAC systems and plumbing and electrical, and those age out as well. So we certainly look at that. And then, of course, every 5 years we've got to refresh technology and improve upon our learning resources. So and buses. I mean, we try to keep an average age of our buses out there. So SPLOST covers a lot of areas within the school system. Just not salary and benefits.
Okay. How many buses do we have?
Gosh, we have over 1,000 buses in Cobb County, and obviously a lot of those are aging with mileage and years. So Matt Sanders, our Director of Transportation, does a great job of letting us know how many buses he needs to refresh. And certainly he's always evaluating and researching the types of buses. All of our buses now that we purchase will have air conditioning on them. He's going into some propane type buses. In fact, there'll be something on the October, I think, board agenda item that will have some bus purchases that are purchased from grants that he gets through the state as well as SPLOST funding.
Okay. Now you said over 1,000.
Correct.
I want to emphasize that's a lot of buses.
That's a lot of buses.
And we're moving a lot of young adults, young people with those buses. Is our maintenance and our fuel costs part of SPLOST? Can that be used as part of SPLOST? Does that have to come out of general funds?
No, that has to come out of general funds. That's an operating expense, not a capital improvement. So so that all is out of our operating expenses.
Now, along with our buses, I assume we have a fleet of other vehicles, whether it's wreckers or cars and things like that.
Yes, we call that our white fleet because of the color scheme associated with all of the district vehicles. And you're right, maintenance has a fleet vehicles. Transportation has fleet vehicles. SPLOST has some fleet vehicles. We already said maintenance, I believe, but finance has a couple. So there are several departments that have fleet vehicles in order to carry on the operation of the school district, and we purchase all of those white fleet vehicles as well.
Okay. If our voters decided that they did not want us to have or use Ed-SPLOST monies, what are our options?
The options out there are rather limited, really a couple. One would be going out and purchasing bonds, which is what we did years and years ago. As I said, the consequences associated with bonds is that it's like a loan and you have to pay it back over a period of years with interest. And so we would have to look at funding that repayment with interest. The other thing that possibly would happen is that the board would have to decide whether or not to increase the millage rate, which of course would therefore increase property taxes to help us pay for these bonds and other things. So there are limited resources.
It would severely limit the options that we have to continue providing the excellent facilities, environment, and the needs of our students countywide.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Do you agree? Okay. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I'd just like to, sure, I'd like to add that, again, I think you mentioned it earlier, but SPLOST VI is coming up on a referendum for November the 2nd with regard to the list of items that we just discussed about. I think it's important for voters to know that for every penny that we receive on every dollar of sales in Cobb County, we really estimate that about 30% of that revenue comes from people who don't live in Cobb County. They traverse through Cobb County. They come here, they go to Six Flags over Georgia, they go to Whitewater, they go to a Braves game, or they just literally buy gas or go to a restaurant or stay in one of the hotels that we have. But every penny that we collect from every dollar spent comes into SPLOST for education purposes. And so 30% of that we think comes from folks who just don't live in Cobb County.
Well, thanks, Nick, for clarifying these things for us and helping us better understand Ed-SPLOST.
Thank you, Randy. It's been a pleasure being here.
And thank you for watching. Regardless of what your choice is, please be sure to vote that day. Your vote will significantly impact our students' education and our local economy. Be sure to join me again next week to discuss some of the great things happening in the Cobb County School District. Thanks again, and have a good day.